Hi, everyone. So welcome to another edition of the Exquisitely Human podcast, sponsored by CareerJ.com. The Exquisitely Human podcast is all about bias that we all have about people that are different to us. So what we're trying to do is together, we're working to remove this bias one person at a time. So today I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Rachel Reid, who is a mobile app developer and is someone that has had most of her life, has grown up with epilepsy. And she's going to tell us her story. The second part of the story is about making a momentous decision that really had such an impactful difference on her life right now. So welcome, Rachel.
Good morning.
Morning. So how are you? How are you feeling?
Yep, feeling really good.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and having a chat with us. You've got a fascinating story. And I'd like you to first, if you don't mind, just share the first part of your story, really, about what it was like growing up with epilepsy.
Yeah. So the story goes that when I was 18 months old, my mum had me on her shoulders and she tripped downstairs. And that's when I started fitting and I was rushed to hospital. And they nearly thought I'd lost me. But my earliest memory is when I was at the age of 5. And sort of looking up into the sky and then getting this funny feeling and thinking, what's happening to me? And then I went to the doctors, and it took a while for the doctors to even diagnose it as epilepsy. And it was just a funny turn. They thought maybe I was daydreaming, and they weren't 100% sure what it was.
Okay, so let me just ask you, so how did you feel then? If it was sort of you thinking at 5 years old was the first time that you were aware of it. So how, describe a little bit, you felt a bit funny, but how, what emotions, what were you feeling really?
Oh, it was really strange. And then I'd had this really bad headache afterwards. And it was almost as though something just took over my body, and then I didn't know what had quite happened.
Oh goodness.
And at the age of 5, you're trying to discover yourself in the world anyway, and to have that experience is really frightening.
Absolutely. So were you able to verbalize those feelings and actually tell your mum, tell your parents about how you were feeling, or did you keep that?
I was a little bit, although every 6 months I had to go and see a consultant, and that was explaining it to them, and that was really hard.
Okay.
Because I generally tend to forget what happened, so I then had to put myself back in that moment.
Okay, so when you went to your consultant, what sort of tests were they doing? Were they quite invasive tests?
Fairly. I mean, at that time it was things like I had an EEG done, so that's the wires on your head. Okay. I had brain scans, and back then the brain scan imagery wasn't that great, so I had CT scans, MRI scans, and it was always probable epilepsy. They'd never really properly diagnosed it.
Okay, so at what age then were you actually given that diagnosis?
So at the age of 16, when I transferred from Adam Brooks Hospital to the National in London, that was when they gave me my first diagnosis.
Goodness me. So for 11 years, you were living with something that you didn't understand, that wasn't being acknowledged. How difficult was that for you? What impact did that have on your everyday life?
But ever so much. I mean, I had no quality of life. I was just put on these drugs, and some of these drugs have really awful side effects. So I was on one for my A-levels, studying for my A-levels, and that was partly the reason why they transferred me to London, because I lived in Colchester at the time and I was due to see the consultant there, but it was the epilepsy nurse there who said, you shouldn't be on a sedative doing your A-levels. And so she transferred me straight to London to sort out my medication.
My goodness. And you must be so thankful for that nurse that actually recognised that something wasn't right and that you needed more specialist care. So tell me then, obviously you got transferred then to the hospital at 16, having gone through the last 11 years of uncertainty to, so what treatment and what happened from there on in, from when you were 16?
So when I was 16, they did the baseline test. So it's things like, so there's 2 centres for the hospital. There's the Central London Hospital, and then there's one in Buckinghamshire called Chalfont, which is where the epilepsy centre is based. And so they did all the tests there. So it's things like memory tests, IQ tests. You see a psychologist, psychiatrist. You do something called a functional MRI scan, which is where you go in the MRI scan and they get you to think of words. So they might give you a letter and you have to find a letter with that begins with that. And that's how they know where your speech comes from.
How fascinating is that? And so did they actually show you everything at the end? Obviously you were having all the tests, but did they show you all the imagery of what
they showed me the scan, and they said to me at the age of 16 I was a potential ideal candidate for surgery, but at that time I thought I really don't want to do it now.
Okay.
I was just in the middle of trying to resit my A levels, and I really didn't feel like doing that.
Okay, so let me just stop you there and just go back a little bit. So how did you feel then when that nurse listened to you or spotted something and sent you off in another direction? How did it make you feel? What sort of emotions were you feeling at that time?
I think maybe slightly terrified and slightly apprehensive, because I kind of felt let down by the consultant in Colchester that I hadn't been seen, and that maybe he should have picked me up and he should have actually done my treatment. But in hindsight, it was probably the best thing that happened, because it got me transferred to the National, and that gave me the opportunity to have the surgery.
Okay, and that's a great attitude, actually, isn't it? Because we can feel maybe angry, we can feel let down, like you've already mentioned, but actually, in hindsight, you're thinking, do you know what? It actually, it's actually worked in my favour in a bizarre sort of way. So you've mentioned surgery. So at the age of 16, then you were offered surgery. What surgery are you talking about? What are you referring to?
So what they found was, so through the brain scans and all the tests, they found, so you have to, in your brain, you have two hippocampus or two hippocampi, and hippocampus is from the Greek word for seahorse. Okay. And so these are seahorse-shaped parts of the brain, and they're both to do with memory. Okay. And so what they told me was my right one, they formally diagnosed me with hippocampus sclerosis, which is a scarring of the hippocampus. Okay. So my right hippocampus was a lot smaller than it should be, and that's where they believed all the seizures are coming from. Okay.
And did they believe that the episode when you were 18 months old was responsible for that, or did they give?
They never said either way, and my mum always felt guilty that she contributed to it. But in some ways, having spoken to other people who were going through surgery at the time, in some ways, having that brain injury so early was a good thing for me.
Okay, that's an interesting sort of evaluation of it. So. Bless you. So you're obviously under this amazing team at the age of 16. So tell us the next part of your life. What did you do at 16? You mentioned A levels. So you did A levels.
When I did a degree in computer science at the University of Kent, which it was a really hard degree to do anyway, but considering I was on medication at the time and trying to adjust that medication, it's incredible that I even graduated in the first place.
And that's really admirable, and so I just want to say well done on that. Under normal circumstances, the majority of us probably would struggle. I never went to university, and my youngest daughter's there, and the things that she speaks about, it's totally over my head. So well done for actually getting through that and trying to deal with or trying to get this medication right as well. So so that took you to the age of, what age were you?
So I was 29 when I finally plucked up the courage to go for the surgery.
Okay.
And it was kind of a combination of getting to the point of, I've tried so many drugs, and I think when I was 16 they were kind of going on the basis that if you tried 2 or 3 drugs and they didn't work, that you had something called drug resistant epilepsy. Wow. So basically any other drugs were unlikely to work. Okay,
so that was another 13 years then from when the operation, the possibility of surgery was mentioned to you, to actually coming to the decision.
And I had to actually ask for it. And the consultant was kind of surprised, a bit taken aback, because he kind of thought, well, at 16 you didn't want it. Well, at the age of 16 versus 29 and being at desperation point are 2 different places.
Absolutely. So do you feel that actually you were you just come to the right, obviously in the right place, the right decision? Obviously at 16 it's very young to make such a major decision. And like you said, that you'd really thought you'd had quite a long time to come to the point where you actually had that conversation and actually instigated that conversation. So how did you feel about that, being in control and having that conversation?
Yeah, I think it was good, because I think I got to the point of, you have to get, I think to have surgery, and especially something as drastic as brain surgery, you have to get to desperation level. And I think I'd reached that. I was having nearly about 100 seizures a year.
Oh my God.
I had no quality of life. It was a constant cycle of, you'd have the seizure, you'd have something called the post-ictal state, where you feel like you've had a hangover and you're really headachy and really, really bad. And then you might have 1 or 2 normal days, and then next one would hit you.
Okay, so that went on for 13 years basically.
And progressively it got worse and worse and worse.
Did it?
When I was 5 years old, if I had one, I could have a sleep and the headache would wear off and I'd be fine. But as an adult, the migraines, the side effects just lasted longer.
Okay. And was there any reasoning behind that? Did you ever find any answer to why it was worse within, in adulthood?
I'm not sure. They kind of believe that maybe the more seizures you have, the worse they become.
Right. Okay.
And it was always mentioned that there was a possibility you could have one in my sleep and die from it.
Okay. Goodness me, how scary. So you got to desperation point, as you describe it, to the point where you tried everything and you just, you got to this desperation point. So you had that conversation. And so what happened next then, once the consultant had sat back on his chair and, listened to you? What was the next step?
So I was referred back to Chalfont to redo all the tests again. So they redid memory tests as a baseline of when I was 29 versus when I was 16. And unfortunately, whereas when I was 16, they did that over the course of a week, when I went back the pre-surgery things, they did that for over a 24-hour period. So it's much more condensed. So you were wearing the EEG while you went to see the consultant, and they kind of crammed it in there was a lot more to cram in a short space of time.
Okay. So how were you feeling then once you made that decision and you started onto the road of having more tests and nearing towards the actual procedure? It
was quite a journey. I mean, it wasn't just that Chalfont hospital. You had to redo all the tests, and I had to go back because I didn't have a good night's sleep wearing EEG. So my memory tests weren't as good as when I was 16. So they were a bit concerned. Okay. So they asked me to go back and redo them, just as a baseline and to compare. And that's when I had the functional MRI scan.
Okay, so could it have quite possibly been, if these tests hadn't been favourable, could they have actually blocked that operation and said, actually, no, you're not an ideal candidate?
Quite possibly, although by doing the functional MRI scan, they actually knew that my speech wouldn't be affected. Right. And there were obviously side effects that could have happened, and there's a whole list of side effects of any operation. Yeah. But these are minor things, like I could have lost my peripheral vision, which meant I couldn't drive, but then I couldn't drive before anyway. Okay. So for me, that wasn't a risk.
Okay.
And then there were things like your teeth could be misaligned, which actually happened to me, and infection and things like that. Okay.
But you were prepared for these. Obviously, you weighed up all the pros and cons of your quality of life. And
I mean, the statistics was something like 5% if I tried another drug, or it was 60 to 70 if I had the surgery.
Wow.
So it's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah. Pardon the pun, and I know you've said that before. Absolutely. So, goodness me, I can't imagine having to make such a decision. I'd be scared to death. But did you have obviously a bit of concern and anxiety around it, or did you just think, you know what? Yeah,
there was a little bit of concern, but I did have to have an extra, as part of the testing procedure, I did have to go into the Central London Hospital for a week and wear the CEG, and they wouldn't let me out of the room for a week. And they wanted to video me having a seizure.
Oh, goodness me. How did that feel then, having to go through that?
Oh, that was horrible, because it was isolation. I didn't have anybody visit me for a week. And in the end, the only way I could trick myself to have one was to not eat one evening. Because I knew that if I was sick or had diarrhea, because the medication didn't get through me, that was a trigger.
Wow. So you sort of brought one on, really, just to try and get it over and done with, really. Bless you.
And I know people that didn't have it in the first trip. They had to come back 2 or 3 times until they'd had one.
Wow.
Because they were quite thorough in making sure that it was going to be of benefit to you.
Which is right, isn't it? But as I say, I can't imagine that isolation, as I say, and just having to wait for your body to go into a seizure. So well done on your thinking there, actually, to try and help yourself along, really, and just get things moving. So from the decision that you're going to have the procedure to actually having the procedure, what sort of time frame are we talking about?
So it was about a year or so. I think the target is to do it within a year, and I think I was just within that.
Oh, excellent. Lovely. So let's fast forward a little bit to the night of the operation then. So which hospital did you go to have?
So this was the National in London, which is just around the corner from Great Ormond Street.
Wow. So you got some top specialists there looking after you. And so you felt confident in their hands as much as you could do. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the evening before, they got me to do another brain scan.
Okay.
The operation. And I had all these markings on my head.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did they have to shave your head? Did they have to take?
They did, but I think they did that when I was under.
Okay.
I don't remember them doing it before. It was just the markings they did before.
So
I cut my hair really short. Yeah, and I cut my hair really short because I was worried about it growing back.
Okay, so you're prepared for that, because obviously it's
Yeah.
something that, as a woman or as anybody, that we can feel quite self-conscious about, obviously having our head shaved, but obviously it was necessary for your surgery. So how long were you in hospital for or how long did the procedure take to start with? How long were you under?
Well, I know I went under about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I came round. I think Mum and Dad said I came round about 1 or 2 in the afternoon.
Oh,
But
okay.
that includes recovery time as well.
So relatively, I suppose, as procedures go, I won't say quick, but relatively good. So what was your recovery like then? Once you'd had it, how did you feel when you came round? Initially, what were your thoughts
So
then?
apparently, the first thing I asked was where are my glasses, and I told my dad that they used an XP machine in the operating table.
Oh my gosh! So you'd got some awareness then. Bless you.
Yeah.
So how long did you stop in hospital for then?
I was only in a couple of days, partly because I had a tube strike, and I think they wanted to free the beds up.
Okay.
But also I was well enough to go home, and I was surprised at my recovery. I didn't think the next day I'd be able to do a Sudoku puzzle or be that alert.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, how amazing is that? So you must have got so much positivity from that the very next day, being able to do something like that, you must have felt on top of the world, really, from the worrying concern of the things that could have gone wrong to actually how quickly that you got to a point where you were functioning at a level that you didn't expect, really. So that's amazing. So how long ago is it from now to then, was it since you had the procedure?
8 years. So 8 years this February.
Okay, so tell me the impact then on your life, your functionality in general, your zest for life and your abilities. What has changed since that procedure?
Well, massive. I passed my driving test last year in 2019. So luckily just before the pandemic, otherwise I would have been in trouble.
Okay.
But that's given me a whole lot of freedom. I mean, with my business, I now do a lot of networking, and I network at least about an hour away from where I live. So in places like Stafford and Wolverhampton, and that would not have been possible without having my own car.
No. So you must feel pretty empowered and sort of free, really, so. Have this freedom from something that was really holding you back and that was really quite debilitating. So what effect has it had on your confidence?
A lot. I mean, I did feel as though this huge weight had been lifted one day. And it was strange because in the first few days and weeks and months, I was counting the days of being seizure free, and then it became years seizure free, and then now it's kind of given.
What a vast comparison of how your life was then living with epilepsy to now not living with it. So is the diagnosis then that you'll never have a seizure, or is there always something a little bit that they
There's a very slight chance, and somebody I'm in contact with who had it before me has unfortunately had a seizure.
Okay.
But it's kind of the same as the general population now. Okay. Me having one.
Okay. So do you support other people then that are going through the procedure, or obviously you've just mentioned someone that you've known gone through the procedure. Is there any support network for people like yourself that were considering it, to get to speak to people that have gone through it? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, at the time there was a forum called Epilepsy Action that I used to go on, and that's where I met somebody who had the procedure before me and somebody who had it after.
You found that really helpful then to just find out the more information, because it was a massive decision for you, but obviously something that you don't regret whatsoever. And you are reaping the benefits, not only from your freedom from passing that driving test, and just that, all the positive impacts, which is amazing. So I think your story is absolutely fascinating, and I think for anyone that's listening today, any of our listeners that know anyone that's going through the same thing as Rachel, that is finding it difficult and has maybe offered the option of having the procedure, then have you got any advice then, Rachel, for anyone that should be listening that finds themselves in this position or knows someone that is in that position?
Well, I think you have to be at the point where you're actually desperate to have it. So that's where it does impact your life so badly. And I was quite lucky. On the morning of the surgery, I actually still had my post-seizure headache. So my last seizure was 2 days before. And that kind of helped me. That made me think, well, actually, I do want to have this done and I need to get rid of this.
Wow. So that was, again, an indicator to think, what, this is you know, another reason if I didn't need reminding of why I'm doing this. So I am just amazed by your story. I just think it's a very brave decision to make, but you know, obviously as an individual, you will only know what it felt like to be in the position of trying to live with epilepsy, and obviously having those headaches and how debilitating it was. But on the other side, how amazing that you feel. And you know, you've said before about, you know, there's a risk with everything, but you're prepared to take that risk to try and get better quality life, and it's paid dividends. I'm so happy and pleased for you, Rachel. So I want to ask you one more question, because obviously we're on the Exquisitely Human podcast and it's all about bias. So did you come across any bias, you know, certainly as you were trying to live through, you know, certainly from sort of 16 onwards, when maybe you're more conscious about being a teenager and a young adult? Did you come across any bias at all about your seizures?
When I was very young, it was kind of taboo. You didn't really talk about it. And I think any brain illness in general, if you think of anything like epilepsy, Parkinson's, dementia, they just simply weren't talked about.
Okay.
And so I never told anybody at school or anybody anywhere that I had it. Okay. And then I did have a seizure in school once, and it got back to the head, and a letter got sent home.
Right. Okay. In hindsight, do you think that it would have been better that school knew, or would you still sort of stick with that, or do you think things have evolved more now?
I think in today's society it would have been better, but back then society was different and attitudes were different.
Yeah, there's more awareness, isn't there, now around a lot of you know, illnesses, and say, you know, obviously getting that support, because with anything we shouldn't suffer in silence and try and hide things, but we try and manage the best we can, don't we? So I want to ask,
and there was never any mental health support for me growing up as a child. Whereas I think now there's a group called Young Epilepsy. Brilliant. Which does help people going through that, whereas in my day you were just told get on with it.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. So so one last question then. What does it mean to you to be exquisitely human?
So it means being able to live your own life in your own way and not worry about prejudices.
Absolutely. And that is, in a nutshell, what it should be about. We don't mean to be biased. We've all got bias, and we all maybe presume and look at people that are different to us in a way that we maybe shouldn't. So obviously this podcast is all about trying to work together to remove those biases, one person at a time. So what I'd like to say is thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I, you know, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, you know, and for all on the listeners as well for sharing this incredible story, and coming through it and being, you know, running your successful business and having that increased confidence and passing your driving test. How amazing. So thank you so much again, and I wish you all the best, and have a great day. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.